Welcome, everyone. This is the Union Federation podcast on the Fandom Podcast Network, where we discuss both Star Trek and the Orville. I'm Kevin. I'm going to be your captain here. And this is, of course, Union Federation on the Fandom Podcast Network and the BQN. And we are discussing Star Trek The Next Generation. More specifically, we are celebrating all of the two-part episodes. We'll get more into that in a moment, but I must welcome my crew to help me out with here on the Union Federation Starship. You know what? I'm going to switch things up a little bit here because I think my co-captain is, I think he's held up somewhere, something about lights. I'm not sure. So I'm going to introduce the co-founder and queen of the BQN. Please welcome Amy Nelson. What's going on?
Well, hello. I am enjoying beautiful weather, so I'm in a tank top. Do I need to be in uniform?
We'll talk about that later, but you know, you're fine until Jellico gets here. So just keep that in mind. So yeah.
Okay.
And with me, as always, co-founder of the Fandom Podcast Network, Mr. Kyle Wagner. What's up?
I'm sorry, Kevin. I was listening to the wonderful Scott Grimes rendition of the Baywatch theme, I'll Be Ready, that has just recently come out. And him and Debbie Gibson teaming up. It's a wonderful thing.
I need to listen to that. I heard stuff, but yeah, I need to listen to that. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. I need to know about this more. I'm sure we can find it on YouTube or something.
I will give more information to you after the podcast.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, as I teased at the top of the show, we are discussing Star Trek The Next Generation. Every two-part episode will be reviewed. And this is episode 194, and we are discussing Chain of Command Part 1 and 2. And we started off this limited podcast series with Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2. And we did Redemption Part 1 and 2. And then after that, we did Unification Part 1 and 2. And our most recent episode was Time's Arrow Part 1 and 2. And we had a special guest. We had Sarah Woloski from the Skywalking Through Neverland podcast network. It was great to have her on. And of course, we're talking Chain of Command. Next week, we got Birthright, Descent, and Gambit Part 1 and 2. And then we're going to have a final episode where we will review all of them and look back on these 8 two-part episodes and look at some other Star Trek fan favorite of two-part episodes throughout the other series as well. And one of the things that I did want to mention, guys, is that this is a limited podcast series that we're doing on these two-part episodes, and as of this recording in 2024, it's been 30 years since the new Star Trek The Next Generation episodes left us for the last time. And, well, I know, Amy, we love revisiting these because this is a way to revisit that nostalgia, right?
Yeah, so good. But this is such a great idea. I'm curious if we should take this on the road and hit the other series two-parters.
That's going to be tempting because there's some good ones to dive into.
I know DS9 has some really good ones.
Yeah, and if you're totally, yeah. If you're watching YouTube here, we got some great slides throughout the rest of this episode, so make sure you check it out. And this up here is a list of all of the 8 two-part episodes. Some of them, of course, were season cliffhangers. Some of them were mid-season two-parters. So yeah, there we go. And by the way, you know how we have been doing these shows, and some of them were released as a movie on Blu-ray. And I found out that Unification was released on Blu-ray. More on that later. Let's go ahead and get into the first away mission here, guys. All right. So what we have here is the Admiral's Log, and we'll start off with Chain of Command Part 1. Amy, let us know, is this a mid-season or cliffhanger? When did this happen?
Well, this happens to be a mid-season two-parter airing December 12th. And then the second one was the 19th. So a couple weeks later, which I thought was weird because I was thinking like December and then wait till after Christmas. But the second one came before Christmas, which I found interesting. So,
and this was season 6. Yeah.
Season 6. Yeah. So, Jean-Luc Picard, Worf, and Beverly Crusher are assigned by Starfleet on a covert mission to seek and destroy a Cardassian biological weapon installation on their border world, Celtris 3. In Picard's place, Starfleet assigns Captain Edward Jellico, who has a vastly different style of command than the Enterprise crew, particularly Will Riker, are accustomed to. Under Jellico, the Enterprise patrols the border near Minos Corva and a strategically significant Federation planet, and holds negotiations with Cardassian representatives as to the fate of the planet. After intensive training on the holodeck, Picard, Worf, and Crusher discreetly arrive on Celtris 3 and infiltrate the base. However, they find no signs of a biological weapon, and suspecting a trap, they attempt to flee. Worf and Crusher escape, but Picard is taken prisoner and brought to Gul Madred, who informs him Celtris 3 was a trap designed to capture Picard.
Dun, dun, dun. Yes, there we go. Okay, well, let's get our first reactions. And if you remember what it was like watching this for the first time, feel free to dive into that. Kyle, I'm going to start with you, buddy.
Okay, well, first reactions. I remember the first time I saw this, and it was like a pretty good mystery of what the heck is going on. Why are they taking Picard off the Enterprise? This whole situation is so strange. And then you get Ronnie Cox on as Jellico, and you just want to punch him out. To be honest, let's be real. I mean, when we talk Ronnie Cox, there's pretty much two other characters I really think of him as. One's a jerk, and one is actually somebody you root for. But it's such an interesting episode too, because you see the crew thrown into this disarray, and then you've got this side mission of Picard, Worf, and Crusher, and you hadn't really seen, I feel like, the classified, more military feel of Starfleet until this episode in Next Generation.
That's a good point.
And I think that's one of the things that made this episode stand out and makes it so different. Is like you are really seeing that military aspect of Starfleet, especially with the way Jellico seems to be much more of a military man, and everything's absolutes with him, and it's his way or the highway, period. So I think it made for a very intense episode. You add in the Cardassians, who at this time, I think they were pretty much on Romulan level of bad guy in Star Trek. I mean, they were definitely, oh crap, the Cardassians are up to something no good. And just every aspect of this, the intrigue of it, and leaving on the cliffhanger, the way the cliffhanger ends on this episode, I think next to Best of Both Worlds, it really was one of those ones like, oh crap, what's going to happen in part 2? Where we really were kind of like worried about Picard here. What's going on with this crew? What is the real story with this Jellico? It left us with, I think, as many questions as Best of Both Worlds did when it ended.
Good call. All right. Amy, want to get your thoughts. Do you remember seeing this for the first time, and what was like revisiting it?
Oh, yeah. No, I don't remember watching it for the first time. Interesting, though, Kyle, that you said that this was sort of the first covert mission type of thing. And I was like, yeah. And we get a little bit more in the Pegasus, right? That comes a couple years later or in the following season. So I think this really is a meaty topic that TNG hasn't really covered. So this two-parter really does set us up for that covert. And I like that point that you brought out about it. I love this and this episode in part because there's so much to talk about, like command style and how a crew works together and team building and trust and all these things that make work and life like important because we are social beings, and how are we interacting? And this just is a fabulous lesson in all of this sociological impact. I just really love it. And even like Jellico making the Cardassians wait, like what a power play. Like there's so much involved in this episode. You could just break it down. I'm so excited.
You know, that was one of my favorite scenes where, and I've seen this in other films and TV series. I've actually seen it too, done in business, where you take a break from something and you wait for the other person to cave and to kind of play their cards. So that was something where that's not the type of command that we were used to seeing Picard do. And off the top of this episode, Alana Necheos is like, yeah, you're being replaced. And then Picard's like sipping his tea going, what? Yeah, look in his face was great. I love this first part. Great way to get on there. I'm a huge fan of Ronnie Cox. I'm going to get into him a little bit more later, but he's done some very memorable characters, especially some villains as well. And I heard he was a very sweet guy in person if you ever get a chance to meet him and such. So, yeah. But let's go ahead and get into the Admiral's episode or Admiral's log for the second episode.
All righty. So again, this aired December 19th. And so we have Madred uses a number of torture methods, including sensory deprivation, sensory bombardment, forced nakedness, stress positions, dehydration, starvation, physical pain, and cultural humiliation to try and gain knowledge of the Federation's plans for Minos Corva. Picard refuses to acknowledge Madred's demand for information. Madred attempts another tactic to break Picard's will. He shows his captive 4 bright lights and demands that Picard answers that there are 5, inflicting intense pain on Picard if he does not agree. Meanwhile, the Cardassians inform the Enterprise crew that Picard has been captured. Jellico refuses to acknowledge that Picard was on a Starfleet mission, an admission necessary for Picard to be given the rights of a prisoner of war rather than being subjected to torture as a terrorist. This leads to a heated argument between Jellico and Riker, which ends with Jellico relieving Riker of duty and assigning Data as first officer. And he looks good in red. LaForge detects residue from a nearby nebula on the hull of a Cardassian delegation ship, and Jellico suspects a Cardassian fleet may attempt to use the cover of the nebula to launch an attack on Minos Corva. Jellico determines that their best course of action is to place mines across the nebula using a shuttlecraft. However, Riker is the most qualified pilot for the mission. Jellico visits Riker in his quarters, where he candidly criticizes Riker's performance as first officer, and Riker does the same for his command style. Jellico asks, rather than orders, Riker to pilot the shuttle. Riker agrees, and he and LaForge successfully lay the minefield. Jellico uses the threat of the minefield to force the Cardassians to disarm and retreat, but not before they release Picard. With word of the failure of the Cardassians to secure Minos Corva, Madred attempts one last ploy to break Picard by falsely claiming that the Cardassians have taken the planet and that the Enterprise was destroyed in the battle. He offers Picard a choice to remain in captivity for the rest of his life or live in comfort by admitting that he sees 5 lights. As Picard momentarily considers the offer, the Cardassian head delegate enters the room and informs Madred that a ship is waiting to take him back to the Enterprise. Picard realizes he has been duped. As Picard is freed from his bonds and about to be taken away, he turns to Madred and defiantly shouts, "There are 4 lights!" Picard is returned to Federation custody and reinstated as commanding officer of the Enterprise. Picard admits privately to Counselor Troi that he was saved just in the nick of time, as by that point he was broken enough to be willing to say or do anything to make the torture stop. And by the end, he actually believed he could see 5 lights.
There are 4 lights! Love that. That one and the other line too that I could do that I always like quoting Picard is, "The line must be drawn here."
No further.
All right, Amy, let's go straight back to you. Your thoughts on this part 2. Picard, he's talking about some acting as well by our knighted actor there. So your thoughts on part 2.
Yes. Watching this after reading Sir Patrick's memoir that he wrote that just came out. And he describes, filming this, being naked and getting into character and how difficult it was for him. So to watch this after having that backstory and back information was way more powerful. And that's why I was like, man, this is a heavy episode. And I'm amazing the torture methods that, I read in the Admiral's log, all the different kinds. And the fact that he was still standing is a credit to Picard. But it is, again, this very meaty, intense, sorrowful, triumphant, broken of an episode. It's very, very good.
Kyle, your thoughts on this second part?
So, in my rewatch of this second part, which I just watched before we did the show, I came to a conclusion that some people might find a little controversial. I think this episode was more emotionally damaging than what the Borg did to Picard. I think this
interesting.
I think when you think back to Best of Both Worlds, Picard fought, and he was still fighting even once they brought him onto the Enterprise. This was a Picard who was pretty much broken and just saved by time, right? By just perfect timing. Otherwise, he was going to say there were 5 lights. And when he admits to it at the end of the episode, and you think about, this is a Picard who fought against the Borg, fought even when he was assimilated, still was finding ways to communicate with Data and fighting against what they were trying to do to him. And yet, in this episode, he broke. I mean, he admits it. He broke. And I think when you think about that, is this more of a traumatic event for him than what the Borg did to him? I mean, at least on the mental aspect of it. Maybe not the physical, but definitely the mental aspect. I mean, this was cruel torture that he went through, and in many different ways. And it was definitely, I think, one of his most powerful performances as Picard in the series. And I think actually there's a few really, really outstanding performances. Jonathan Frakes was phenomenal in this 2-parter as well. And I know we'll get to that in a little bit, but yeah, I think this, looking at this and rewatching it, this was an emotionally more breaking and heavy thing on Picard than I think becoming a Borg was, or at least should have been maybe portrayed more in.
That's an excellent point, Kyle. We get a lot of PTSD Borg references to Picard in future episodes and movies and such. And there's a part of me that wishes, now that you brought that up, that they would have addressed what this moment in Picard's life would have, if he ever looks back, if the character, and I don't know, Amy, was there any reference to that book of, whether his character should have revisited this memory or this torture?
No, just about the filming of it. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, the one thing that I will always remember from this episode, and I've seen this scenario take place in other incarnations of war films or people getting captured, racist people hurting other people. And the scene that really gets me is when Gul Madred is there with his daughter in front of Picard, basically Picard basically being an animal, treating him as an animal. And that's a rough scene to watch, because in real life this has happened. You've seen, whether you read about it or you learn about it in history or watch it in movies, when conquerors take over and they have their offspring, they look at the people they've conquered or their prisoners, and they'll make their children see this and watch this, and it's taught and it's ingrained within their brains and their mind. And it also reminds me too, if you're racism is not you're not born with racism, you're taught racism, basically. And this is a form of this right here, which I find interesting. And I back in my head, I thought this would have been, since this episode of these 2 episodes of Chain of Command Part 1 and 2 are really tied into now that Deep Space Nine is airing, like literally like right after this, it would have been nice, since this is setting up the Cardassians as being like the next bad. We'll get to that a little bit more later. It'd be nice if maybe that daughter character would have made an appearance in Deep Space Nine, and and either as a older tyrant herself or something like that, or something like that. Kyle, do you have something you want to say?
Well, too, I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually have a question for you, Kevin, and it goes back to David Warner playing this character.
Yeah.
Considering what we just did on Culture Clash, where we saw David Warner play Jack the Ripper, now see him in this, I was looking at his character in a lot different light, having seen played Jack the Ripper in Time After Time, and seeing this character, because they're both sadistic in their own way.
Yeah, you're right. And yeah, Kyle's referring to our Culture Clash Live episode, where we've been, this has been the year of time travel on Culture Clash Live, and we've been going to time travel movies. And the movie that you speak of, Kyle, Time After Time, right?
Yeah, Time After Time.
Yeah. Jack the Ripper, escapes in a time machine and comes to current day in 1979 California, and continues his horrid reign of crimes. And David Warner is fantastic in this. And it's funny too, Kyle. And we're gonna touch on David Warner a little bit later. But I started looking back, and he's been a part of Star Trek before. We'll talk about that later. But he was just menacing in this. We'll get more into that a little bit later. But yeah.
And the other point I want to bring up with that is, one of the things I found so just absolutely fascinating about this episode was it didn't, for David, for that character, it didn't become just about breaking and getting the information from Picard. It became a personal battle with Picard of, I am going to break this man, and how he almost breaks himself in the process, giving up information that Picard ends up using against him. And at the very end, just when he's about to get him to break, because he threatens the crew, and he
and the scene you're referring to as well, which is great, is that Picard looks at Madred a little differently, going, "I now kind of pity you."
Yeah,
that pisses off Madred. That's not what he wanted, And then Madred turns on the pain, and just gets some really, really, God, really good acting from Patrick there, and of showing different types of torture and stuff and like that. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. God.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that you bring up, that Gul Madred sort of loses himself, because this, for some reason, was a personal vendetta. The trap was designed specifically for Picard. So I'm sort of wondering what does Gul Madred have against Picard? That he was captain of the Enterprise?
Well, I think initially that's what it was about. Was, again, Picard is the captain of the flagship of the Starfleet. Let's get Picard. He's going to have all the information. And then, as he couldn't break Picard, it became personal to him, and it became about, because he talks about it, like at the very end. It's like, I would love to go to intellectual war with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it would have been interesting if Madred returned later, Kyle, because the thing that you learn from the Cardassians later on is they're obsessed with power. They're very prideful as well, and they are looking to basically make a presence in this part of the galaxy and become very, very powerful. And to where that we learn later on, they team up with the Dominion to do such stuff, and of course that backfires on them later on. But I like this kind of turn, guys. Actually, I'm going to bring this question to you guys. So, in Unification 1 and 2, we were getting the Romulans as a very powerful big bad, but now they are focusing in on the Cardassians because of the history of Deep Space Nine, and that Cardassians ruled over Bajor, and Bajor was basically prisoners of Cardassia. What did you guys like? Did you guys like that idea that we were getting the seeds laid down for us Cardassians being the next bad guys, Kyle?
I loved it, and I'm a fan of the Cardassians as the bad guys, because here's the difference between the Cardassians and the Romulans is, you never felt like the Romulans would get down in the mud and do the really dirty stuff. And the Cardassians, they were going to do whatever they had to accomplish what they needed to do. And with the Cardassians, it was like, okay, there wasn't a limit to stop them. It was all about what they could do to win. And there was no, when you have somebody who's that motivated in a culture that's that motivated, they're incredibly dangerous, because there is no limit to the lines they will draw. And I mean, and even in this episode where they talk about what they've done to their culture, what they've done to their people, all in the name of war, and yet they're looking to continue having war. And so they don't see, all they see is war and progressing the empire, not necessarily the fall of their war. So yeah, I think the Cardassians, for me, became one of the more intriguing villains in Trek history. And especially knowing we were setting up DS9 with everything that's going there, it was a great taste of what was to come. And then when we got into DS9, people were intrigued by the Cardassians enough, and now getting the deeper story of the Cardassians and what they did on Bajor and what their culture and species was all about, I think this really helps set people up to have that initial interest in DS9.
What about you, Amy? What do you think about the Cardassians being laid down as like, gotta watch out for these guys?
Yeah, I really like it that there is a variety of bad guys in our universe, because you're right. You get the Vulcans and the Romulans and that, wonderful story. And Kyle, I think you're right. They're the manipulating but they're not going to get their hands that dirty, where the Cardassians, yeah, and their trouble. And it does really help support the Deep Space Nine show that was just, getting on its feet. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. The Cardassians made really good villains, and one of the most awesome characters to come out of it, of course, was Elam Garrick. That character. But when it comes to one of the most memorable lines in Star Trek Next Generation, or even in Star Trek in general, you could say there are four lights, with Picard just, in full defiance saying, you haven't quite broken me. But then, we get this moment here where he does sit down with Troy and says, I was about to say that there was five. It's that was a sombering moment, that final scene right there. So,
well, thank goodness we have a counselor on board.
I know, right?
Finally, after, yes, this is definitely significant, but I wish that we would have another, like, more of those closing scenes from previous missions and episodes, because people have been going through a lot of bad crap. And this is the first time where we see Troy actually counseling Picard. Come on now.
Yeah. No, perfect. Well said. Well, there's a reason why we're doing these podcasts, guys. Let's get into that. So I want to give credit here to Dalton Norman, who on April 30th, 2022, came up with a great article that inspired this limited podcast that we're doing here on Screen Rant. And he wrote the article about all the two-part episodes. And so I figured, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take this ball and run with it. And here's what he said about Chain of Command, guys. It's pretty cool. He says, fleshing out the ruthless Cardassians, Chain of Command was one of the darkest storylines in Trek history and challenged Captain Picard like never before. Sent on a top-secret mission to Cardassian space, Captain Picard is replaced on the Enterprise with a humorless and unpopular fill-in named Jellico. Picard is captured and tortured while Jellico attempts to stop a full-scale Cardassian invasion of Federation space. Showing the guileless Cardassians at their most evil, the episodes prepare viewers for what to expect in Deep Space Nine. As for the story itself, Picard's journey is harrowing and is interesting to see the ship's dynamic when the beloved captain is replaced by an inferior substitute. Jellico is a fascinating, if unlikable, character and shows that Starfleet doesn't always produce the best and the brightest. Now, we're going to have a discussion on Jellico coming up a little bit, guys. But I wanted to, regarding the article itself, the two things that I want to mention was getting someone else to command the Enterprise other than Picard, because he's dead or supposedly dead, basically he's just relieved, and there's a ceremony about that. I want to get your guys' thoughts on that because, we get, like I said earlier, we get the Admiral Nechayev saying, "I'm here to relieve you of command." Amy, what do you think of this idea to get Picard out of the captain's chair?
Right. Definitely a fun twist. And I love sort of the hints that this is going to be permanent. Oh, well, they don't usually do the whole change of command ceremony unless this is permanent. Oh, they're bringing in someone like, I can man the Enterprise. It's just for one mission. Oh, they're bringing in a new captain. Like, so there's these hints that are being dropped that it's like, oh, this is what is going to happen. I love it. And those little hints are like little breadcrumbs.
Kyle?
That's one of the genius things of this 2-part episode is I really think when you go back and talk about your first time seeing this and not know, obviously revisiting, but at the time, not knowing, well, wait a minute here. This is, and then when you have the ceremony and to do all these little things like the ceremony and everything like that, because you have Picard and Crusher and Worf going on this special mission that they can't talk about with anybody, but it's selling it to the crew, and the crew is realizing that they, this is legit, except for the few that might be in the know that something feels more up like a Riker and Troy, but everybody else is just kind of it's selling this class mission so that they can classify this other mission that's going on, and it's brilliantly done and well handled. And in the meantime, now you're kind of wondering in the back of your mind, is Picard going to make it out of this? And it's like, because I mean, even at this point, we've seen Picard get out of a lot. We know DS9 is getting ready to come out. Are they going to? Is Next Gen really going to take a back seat to DS9 with the new Trek show coming out? So there was a lot of questions in place at the time. And so people were like,
TNG people were like, no, we're not done yet.
But I again, just so well handled and under the aspect of the storyline. And I think that's what makes it stand out so well is the puzzle pieces really fit together. And as they're forming the bigger picture, you're just like going, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. That makes sense. You may not like it, but it makes sense.
Good points, guys. What I really liked about this 2-part episode along that line is it was nice to see this well-oiled machine of the crew get tested and their anchor, Captain Picard, taken away from them. And you get this kind of by-the-book cantankerous guy. And what's interesting, too, is the article refers to Jellico as being replaced by an inferior substitute. Jellico is a fascinating, if unlikable, character and shows that Starfleet doesn't always produce the best and brightest. Well, we're going to talk about Jellico right now because as we've had time to marinate on this episode and this character of Jellico for 30 years now, and also more recently, we got to see Jellico return. Yes, Jellico returns as Admiral Jellico in Star Trek Prodigy. And I want to let you guys know that I found a great article done on December 2022 by Anthony Pascal, trekmovie.com. Interview with Ronnie Cox on Jellico's enduring legacy in Star Trek Prodigy and the Next Generation. I want to read some of the highlights here because in October, New York Comic-Con, the big mid-season announcement for Star Trek Prodigy at this time was the return of Ronnie Cox as Edward Jellico, his no-nonsense Captain Jellico in the Star Trek 2-part episode Chain of Command is still remembered and debated to this day. 30 years later, Ronnie Cox is voicing Admiral Jellico, Starfleet Commander-in-Chief and Vice Admiral Janeway's boss on Star Trek Prodigy. In an exclusive interview with Trek Movie, Cox talks about the impact of the original run on TNG, his return to the franchise, and why he thinks everyone would be better off if they just listened to more to Jellico. The interviewer starts off going, it's been 30 years, so do you have to go back and watch Chain of Command to get the character? And he goes, no, I didn't. In my bones. I knew where he was coming from back then, and it's the same place now. Interviewer, good amount of time has lapsed with Jericho, so did the producers have any briefing or backstory for Admiral Jellico, or is it just the same kind of thing? We just jumped in it and did it. Ronnie says. Interviewer, the producers have talked about how Jellico has some conflict with Janeway. Do you see him as an adversary? Ronnie, all they have to do is do what Jellico says to do, and things will be fine. I love how Ronnie's just like, this is my guy. This is how I know how to play him. Interviewer says, how do you see him as a leader and a person? Is he someone you would like to meet? Ronnie says he's very competent and he knows what he's doing, in a bit of an authoritarian in that he sort of gets an idea how things should be done and really doesn't have much tolerance for anyone going against that. So therefore, again, if you just listen to what he's saying and follow through what he's doing and look at the logic of what he's doing and realize he's right. I want to take a quick break there, guys, and kind of relate this information to what we've learned from Unification of Chain of Command Part 1 and 2. He barks his commands, and there's also been a lot of debate with fans lately, and I did some research on this, was like, maybe Jellico is kind of right. Yes, he's unlikable, but he seems like he's getting stuff done. Kyle, jump on this.
So here's the whole thing is, especially in the rewatch, Jellico's not a bad guy. He's a different style of captain, and he's a captain that's put in a position where he might have to go to war and he might have to get into a battle.
Excellent point.
And he's like, no, you may not like what I'm saying, but this is what's going to get this ship ready for what could be coming in his mind. And he is a captain. He has experience, and an experience I think some experience. He has more experience with the Cardassians than anybody. That's why they did this. And so he kind of knows what to expect somewhat from the Cardassians.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like getting that temporary boss is coming in to do some special training or something like that, and he just rubs everybody the wrong way because of what his method is. But there's actually, I don't want to say, but his methods have a result, and it's for a purpose. What I think is interesting is, and I think he has his level while everybody else is like, oh, well, this is within Federation regulation. He's like, yeah, but it's not within regulation of what we're going to possibly be going through. So he's an a-hole. I wouldn't want to go have a drink with him.
I kind of would.
But
you liquored up a little bit.
But he is also he's still looking out for the best interests of his crew, and he's doing what he thinks is right. So he's not evil per se. He's just that hardline boss that sometimes we come across in life that, you know what, he's going to drive you crazy, but at the end of the day, maybe he is accomplishing the right thing. And, part of me wishes there would have been a brief moment where Jellico's in 10 forward and would have had a conversation with Guinan, because that would have been an interesting conversation.
Amy, this is one of those situations where we look at things through a different lens the older that we get.
Mm-hmm.
And we also look at a different lens if you are in a position of being in charge of people, where maybe in a time you were not.
Right.
Your thoughts on the different opinions of Jellico as time has turned.
Oh boy. This rewatch, I really recognized how helpful he was to Picard and the mission, because when he was, you can tell he was thinking, and when he made that suggestion to send the probe in first to try and get the telemetry of because the information was 2 years old. That's terrible. And so for him to come up, find a solution, and then order Riker, this is what needs to happen. It's going to happen on Delta Shift because I've already worked it out. This is a man with a plan, and it should happen. And then it just falls apart. And I recognize how much he wanted the mission to be successful. And he's a diehard Starfleet. You can tell he just bleeds blue, or whatever the colors are of the Federation. But all of this could have been cleared up with better communication. And Riker, and especially the head officers, are used to knowing what's going on. Right. And when they don't, then they're like, what's going on? What are we doing? And why are you a jerk? Because if Riker knew what Jellico was thinking of, okay, where it's going to be Delta shift. We got to get this probe. We've got to be ready for action. Worf, you've got to do these torpedoes because we're going to war. Because why? Because of this. But there's no communication. And so you get the reaction of, why am I doing this? Because intelligent people don't like being told what to do because I said so as a reason. And so we are used to having our crew come up with solutions and work together, and it's not happening this time. So it is so jarring for us. Kyle?
I think that what you bring up an excellent point, Amy, but I think it also shows the internal conflict that exists within Starfleet. Is it a military organization? Is it an exploration organization? And I think Jellico obviously represents the military side, and like I treat this like I'm in the military, and I think that's where he comes. That's probably where he falls within a Starfleet line, where you have somebody like Picard. He's more about the exploration and getting out there, the original mission. And I think that's one of those things that they've always played up that little bit of conflict with,
which is why Section 31 was brought into the business. Yeah.
But Kevin, I just want to say this about Jellico: at least he's no Dick Jones.
Yes, Ronnie Cox is great villain from RoboCop. It's, by the way, before I want to let you know that Ronnie Cox has some thoughts on Jellico here and how people were looking at him. But before we go any further, guys, going forward, right before it's my turn to talk, can you guys just say Captain on the Bridge? Is that cool? Kyle's like, nah, dude.
I'll say something on the bridge, but
well, as the interviewer says, Jellico's original appearance in Star Trek: The Next Generation is kind of polarizing. Have you followed the fan debates? Ronnie Cox says, oh, sure. They either hate him or there are people who think he's the greatest captain there ever was. So if you go back and look what he did, he achieved a great deal of things there. One of the things that was different about Chain of Command is that the original producers didn't like internal conflict among the characters. That robbed them dramatically of conflict among characters. And then Jellico came in and was able to institute that. So his sort of beef with Riker brought a new dimension to the show. And Kyle, you mentioned earlier about Riker and snapping back at him and stuff like that. I thought that was a great point by Ronnie right there. I just wanted to say that. And I'm also going to come back to that thing about the military thing in another segment coming up here. But anyway, I just want to give you a chance to reply to that.
Well, okay. So one other thing here too. I would hate to see what would happen if Jellico ever had to meet Tilly. I'm just throwing that out there right now.
That would be an interesting thing. Yeah, definitely. Anyway, sorry.
I just wanted to say one more thing with the Riker thing. Riker, more of anybody in the crew, so had a right to feel the way he was feeling, because if you think about it, wait a minute, what about me here? When Picard gets replaced, it's like, whoa, what have I done that all of a sudden I'm getting skipped over? And then to bring in somebody who just doesn't trust, doesn't communicate the way Riker did with Picard. And maybe it shows a little bit that maybe the crew of the Enterprise is a little spoiled because they're working with Picard.
Mm-hmm.
And
that it brings up questions about that. Yeah, they get it. Maybe they're a little too comfortable, and that's why I like this episode, because it shakes up the status quo. When you lose, and I'll be honest with you, there was a job that I have that I really, really, really loved until my boss got replaced by a horrible person that was above her. And that job went to shit after that. I lost a really good job. So I know what it's like to lose someone, a good leader, and that was good at what they did. And we get a Jellico type person. But the interviewer asked about Marina Sirtis. Says Marina Sirtis has talked about how important this episode is because of Jellico got Troy to start wearing the Starfleet uniform. And I have a direct quote from Marina later on. And Ronnie goes, exactly. That's the other thing that Jellico did that scratched a lot of it. She actually asked. Jellico gets a bunch of beef pork for making her put on a uniform, but she asked for that, and she's got a lot more stuff after that. and the fish in the ready room. Patrick Stewart always hated the fish in the ready room, he said. Quote, we're doing a series about the dignity of all creatures in the universe, and we got captured fish in the ready room. But the producers like shooting through the fish swimming around there, so Jellico did that for Patrick, and he laughs a little bit. And I did want to show a picture there of Jellico next to, of course, the new Starfleet uniform that Marina is wearing there. And I have a picture there, by the way, because I don't know if you guys know this. Oops, sorry. Ronnie Cox is a musician. And they go on through later in the interview saying about his appearance on Prodigy. And the interviewer says, Jellico has actually been mentioned on other Paramount Plus animated shows, which is more of a comedy show called Lower Decks, where as head of Starfleet, he has done things like banning singing. And then Ronnie Cox's reply is, yeah, he hates music, which is ironic, because here's a picture of Ronnie Cox performing. He's a very good musician. And if you remember the movie Deliverance, he actually plays a guitar in that as well. He's a very accomplished musician there as well. So I just want to get your final thoughts on the Jellico discussion here, guys, because it's worth it. Amy.
Yeah, he's, I do like him because he's no nonsense, just come in, and I respect and I get that way. I've had so many times my students will say, Miss, I was so scared of you at the beginning. But, because I'm like, all right, we are going to do our warm-ups. We're going to do the lesson. You're going to do the homework. I have a plan, and I am ruler of the classroom because I'm the teacher. So I get where Jellico's coming from. He's the captain. This is his domain. He is ruler of the Enterprise D right now. They brought him in for his expertise in strategy and in war. And like you said, Kyle, it's not an exploration ship anymore. We have now changed because we might be going to war with the Cardassians. So we need to bring the best wartime people, captains at the front. And yeah, Riker didn't have that. So everything makes sense. It's just the conflict, personality style. And again, like I said at the top of this episode, the writers go through and pick out every type of authoritative or laissez-faire leadership, these leadership styles, how they're working together. And I just freaking love Data, who sort of steps up or is pulled up by Jellico when he's going around, and Jellico's like, all right, I need this done in engineering. I need this done on the weapons. And every single time Data's like, well, that's feasible. And Geordi's like, well, if we work around the clock, yep, get it done. And come on, Data, you're with me. And then, it's like Data's
get it done.
Yes. And Data's throwing everyone under the bus, but it's like, yes, we can get that done. Yeah, that's feasible. Yeah, that makes sense. I can get you there in 1 hour. So Data's the yes man, which is hilarious because everything, it's just logic. It's just facts. And that's all that Jellico is dealing with. He's not dealing with any interpersonal BS. And I think that's why he comes off as the a-hole.
It seems like to me, Kyle, that he is already looking at the next 4 or 5 steps. It seems like he's ahead of everyone of what he wants to get done in a certain way. Any final thoughts on the character of Jellico? Do you like him more now?
I'm not gonna say I like him more, but I understand him more, and I think that's the big difference. You sit here and you ask yourself, if Jellico, because even in the conversation he has with Deanna, if I had more time, I would maybe get to know the crew better, but I don't have that time. And he, when you think about it, Kevin, I'll give you an example I know you'll completely understand. It would be probably going from Andy Reid as your head coach to Tom Coughlin as your head coach. You go from the real player-friendly head coach to the guy who's just going to run everybody into the ground, whether he likes you or not.
There's different types of coaching and different types of captaining.
And I think this is a great example of it. And I mentioned it a little earlier. maybe the Enterprise crew was a little spoiled. Yes, they're a well-oiled machine, and I'm not saying they're a bad crew, but they weren't in a position to be ready for what Jellico was going to have. And he had 51. He basically said, I have 51 hours.
Yeah.
And so he had no time. So he just had to go and take charge. I don't think he had time. Now, maybe he should have taken a 15-minute meeting with Riker and kind of cleared that up. And then Riker could have been his spokesman to the rest of the crew. But again, he's so thinking about the mission, thinking about what he has to deal with. Because not only has he got to get this ship ready, he's got to have this negotiation with the Cardassians. He's got to have this, and this going. So I think that while they try to portray him as the bad guy, I think it's not so much that he's the bad guy. He's just misunderstood because there was no time to build an understanding. And I think,
good point.
I think that's the big thing.
Well, I looked at it through a different lens when I was watching this recently, and I gotta tell you, I like Jellico. I love Ronnie Cox's portrayal, and he just doesn't have time for bullshit. He doesn't have time for crew minutia. We're on the edge of war here. I can't worry about this right now, and and I liked how hands-on he was. I think you kind of alluded to that earlier, Amy, about how he's doing this, and he's asking for different shifts happening, and he's showing people stuff, and so that was one of the things I really liked about it. But I'm gonna shed a little bit more light on his character a little bit more here, because guys, if you notice, this is a Blu-ray here of Chain of Command Part 1 and 2. I'm gonna hold this up right here. And when we first started doing this podcast, there was a few of the other ones that we've talked about that had the Blu-ray movie of these in a special edition, and Best of Both Worlds did, Redemption, Unification did. And I did not know that there was a Chain of Command out there. I had to search to see if there was, and not all of them had them, and this one did. And it was released here. And we'll go ahead and get into more information about the Blu-ray special features here, guys. This was released June 24th, 2014. And of course, this is from this was in from season 6 in 1992. And I wanted to get into some of the special features on this, guys, because I did my homework on this, because I was curious, like, the special features that I'm going to tell you about this, were they in the season 6 Blu-ray edition of the full season? No, they weren't. And I also went back to my old trusty DVD of season 6. Were they in this one? No, they weren't. So unless someone has uploaded the stuff that's on here on YouTube, this is the only way you can get this information. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about here. First of all, there's a great documentary called The Privilege of Rank. And there's some great interviews here. First of all, with Ronnie Cox as Jellico, Ron Moore, one of the writers, who then does go on to Deep Space Nine, Marina Sirtis, of course, who plays Troy, Natalia Nogolic, who plays Admiral Nechayev, Frank Bate Marco, supervising producer of TNG, and of course Patrick Stewart himself chimes in on this. Some really, really good interviews on here, and I don't know where these interviews are, like I said, unless they've been uploaded or put somewhere else. But the only way you can find this special Privilege of Rank special feature is on this Blu-ray. And speaking of the Blu-ray here, there's a great couple of interviews, especially with Marina Sirtis. Yeah, here we go. Right there. I'll leave it right there. So I don't know if you want to read this quote from Marina Sirtis, Amy, but this is her comments on wearing her new Starfleet uniform. And it does touch on military. Go ahead.
Yes. Quote, I was happy when they finally got me into a spacesuit and I looked like everyone else. We're the Navy, for God's sake. We're actually military up there. And there she is, wafting around in a prom dress. No, I got my pips back when I got my spacesuit. I was a lieutenant commander. But where would I put my pips, right? Tattooed on my cleavage? I don't know, somewhere. So when I got my spacesuit, people said, oh, right, she did go to Starfleet Academy. She is an officer. She's just not this air fairy person in her office, giving advice to people, end quote. That is so Marina.
It is. Okay, I need to talk about her spacesuit. Her now wearing the this actual Starfleet uniform. I remember when this happened, and I remember there was a later episode where she takes a command test on the where she takes her like command test, whatever, and there's a like a holodeck thing where she has to send holodeck Geordi basically to his death to say. I don't remember the episode. Do you remember the episode at all? What that was called?
Thine own
Yeah.
self.
Thank you. And it was a really good episode. But what I love about this interview with her is that, she's the counselor, but she was an officer. She was a Starfleet officer. She went through the training like everyone else did. She learned how to do, weapons training, all that kind of stuff. And I've always been a fan of Marita, and I've always thought that she was beautiful. But I got to tell you, that Starfleet uniform of hers, she looks fantastic.
Good.
I always loved it. I thought it was a great look on her. I'm glad they kept it. Amy, you being, of course, the biggest fan of Marina, you recently meeting her at Star Trek Las Vegas. Give me your thoughts on her now wearing this uniform.
Yeah, she loves it. I mean, I've heard her talk so many times on the cruise and at the convention, and she loves being put into the spacesuit. And in this interview, as we discussed from the DVD, like she gives very good points. Like, we're in this Navy type of thing. Of course, we all should be in uniform. You're not going to have someone just traipsing around in, as she says, a prom dress. So funny. And I, as like a woman, I loved her blue dress. I thought it was beautiful. It was flowy, and the little girl in me watching it was like, oh, she's so pretty. But when she gets her uniform, like, it's like the producers actually saw her and gave her these amazing episodes that we get in season 7 with Marina Sirtis, Thine Own Self. She becomes commander, and she oh my gosh, the Romulan, face of the enemy, face of the enemy.
Yeah.
The
iconic Deanna episode.
Exactly. So she's getting these meteor parts, and she absolutely looks fabulous in the uniform, like fabulous.
Kyle, I want to get your thoughts on her in the uniform. I just want to give a shout out before I forget it too. I loved her in her cowboy outfit. Was it Durango? Was that her character's name?
Yeah. Yes.
Kyle, your thoughts on Marina getting able to wear the Starfleet uniform?
I think it was a big moment for the show and for her, because in a way, I think her getting to wear that uniform, all of a sudden she was on equal level with the rest of the cast. She wasn't wearing these outfits that accentuated her body and playing just on certain aspects of her. By putting her in the actual Starfleet uniform where you see her rank, you look at the character in a totally different light and in a totally different way. And I think it is a progression of the writers. And I think I think that is a progression within the show itself and in the times as the show was evolving through this interesting time in history. And you see that. And I think for Marina, from everything Amy's told me and when I've read in articles, it really changed her feeling of being on the show and how she felt being on the show, and just a certain level of respect. I mean, that's what it came down to me. And I like how they pulled this off in the episode where Jellico's like, no, you're a member of this organization. You will look like you belong. And in a way, he's telling this to her because he feels that Troy is being disrespectful with the outfit she's wearing. And yet at the same time, it's empowering. And I think that's the really interesting thing that happened in this episode with this moment. But I think it's an amazing moment. And the fact that they kept it going afterwards, I think that was the most important thing. If they had just, in the next episode, she was back in one of those other outfits, I think it would have been a complete waste. And let's be honest with you, I think she looked amazing. And it too, and it just gave her a presence that was just very different from the presence she carried with the other outfits, and I think it worked well.
One thing's for sure, not only did she look great in that uniform, but also Jellico made his mark on the Enterprise. We got the uniform change, of course, with Troy. We also got that fish out of the captain's ready room there, which, and by the way, I did listen to the audio commentary on this Blu-ray, guys, because on the audio commentary, you also get Ronnie Cox on there with Jonathan West, who I think he was the director of photography, I think, and Mike and Denise Akuda. Great audio commentary, and Ronnie Cox just giving his thoughts on it. And a lot of the information we learn about in the trivia and stuff comes from this interview, which I thought was kind of fascinating. And speaking of the Blu-ray, guys, did you know there's 9 deleted scenes in part 2 that were not used? And I'm going to highlight 4 of them because I felt that they were the most interesting here. And as you can see, there's a scene there, if you're watching the video, with Jellico talking to Beverly, and behind the scene was not completed because it was deleted, so you can see the blue screen behind him. But the first scene I did want to mention here is Geordi and Jellico scene, a conversation. This is when they're in the Jeffries tube, and this is Captain Jellico crawling around a Jeffries tube here with Geordi. And it's a conversation between those two, and it's cut from the final episode, revealed that Jellico went to Starfleet Academy with Geordi's previous CO, Captain Zambada. They both played rugby together, and neither of them was very good.
Huh.
Now, here's an interesting, it's very interesting to watch this. There's the, if you look at the picture where Jellico is looking at Beverly, this scene takes place, the Beverly scene, this is when everyone is talking to him, right? And then as they leave the conference room, Marina's character, Troy, is still there talking with Jellico. And Deanna tells Jellico that the Cardassians will likely torture Captain Picard for information on Starfleet operation. Jellico agrees, but then asks Troy to contact Starfleet and have them change out any sensitive codes or other material that Picard had access to, just in case. The counselor is not pleased. This scene, while presenting a logical request to protect Starfleet secure operations, probably pushes Jellico too far into the bad guy territory. He's not asking something improper, but it's just a little too much. And when you watch this scene, he kind of sits back and he's got this kind of diabolical look. If this scene was left in, I think it would have changed him into more of a villain than this kind of tough, in your face type of thing. And have you seen this scene at all, Amy? Have you seen this at all?
No, but now I think I need to go get the Blu-ray DVD, or that's insane. And I see what you're saying, because like I'm reading, what you're reading, and I'm like, well, that's logical, but if how Ronnie Cox acts it, that could change the tone of it all.
Kyle.
And two points, because I want to go back to the other thing where you have this scene of Geordi and Jellico in the Jeffries tube. And it was something too that I noticed with Jellico throughout these 2 episodes. He was always hands-on with everything. He was going down to engineering and looking at things. He was there on the shuttle with Geordi when they have that conversation about the Titan turn and all of that. So he wasn't just barking orders from the captain's chair. He was very hands-on, which is interesting. But it's a great point too, because you could probably do that scene now because of how certain things come across. And how Ronnie Cox acted in that scene, and even though that was cut out, there's still a little bit of scene similar where he's talking about not going to rescue Picard, and you can just tell it sits the wrong way, and it makes him look like the bad guy. If you have that scene, that could push that over the top and really change that dynamic of character.
It really makes you feel like Jellico has given up on Picard. Because of what because you remember what happened in Best of Both Worlds. The Borg were able to assimilate and get all the information that they needed from Picard to, strike against Earth. But I feel like at this time, with watching that scene, and if you see that picture right there of Troy looking at him, like she's kind of in disbelief, like,
Oh, she's
he
burning a hole through him.
yeah, it's a very fascinating scene to watch, and I'm glad they didn't put it in there, but it's really nice to watch in retrospective because it would have changed the dichotomy of this character and villainized him.
Mm.
Well, and it would have villainized him in a way of, does he want the ship for himself? He
Yeah,
doesn't want Picard back because he wants the ship for himself.
because he makes a comment about, leaving the Cairo earlier in the first episode, I think. Yeah, but it's not the Galaxy class starship that the Enterprise is.
Right.
So it's you almost kind of feel like it's a trophy for him, sort of, or it's a status symbol to be in charge of this particular ship, because and he's like, now I got the captain gone. Now now that I've sent the first officer to his room, it's kind of a power play a little bit too, I think too, which makes him even more interesting. Speaking of the previous scene there, where we see him talking with Beverly, that's where they're with the whole council there. That's the observations lounge with the senior staff and Jellico. The senior staff offers resistance to Jellico's battle plans, but the captain's mind is made up. Beverly raises her concerns about Jellico's plan to stage a preemptive strike against the Cardassian fleet hidden in the McAllister Nebula, something that would clearly be taken as an act of war, gambling hundreds of lives in the process. Surprisingly, Troy is one to speak up in defense of the plan, describing the 2 million inhabitants of Minos Corva currently under the threat of Cardassian attack. Another good episode. I can see why they did take it out. I could have seen it put in as well, but yeah. And just the last scene here with Jellico and Worf, which I thought was kind of interesting. Jellico meets with Worf, and this is where he, as you mentioned, Kyle, he's hands-on here, in the shuttle bay to inspect the antimatter mine sent to be secretly attached to the Cardassian ships hiding in the nebula. Worf describes each container as being filled with 100 antimatter mines, and the two discusses some of the technical issues with getting them into place in the nebula. Ronnie Cox gives some pretty stilted deliveries in some of these lines and dialogue, which kind of helps the scene's removal seem appropriate. 9 deleted scenes in the second episode of this two-parter that they did not include. I didn't find any deleted scenes in the first episode, but Blu-ray right here, guys. That's how you get it. Any comments on the deleted scenes, guys? Amy?
Yeah, those are great. And I love seeing what they did delete. And it's like, gosh, why did they take out that one? I think that one with Beverly and Troy needed to stay in. I think it would have tended like, oh, maybe some of the crew is coming around to understanding his importance, of this Cardassian war. I think it shows a little more compassion of what are the stakes of Minos Corva.
Yeah. Kyle?
It's interesting because you can see how much of a tightrope they were walking with this episode and how much one scene could have changed the narrative. And I think that tells you just how complex this episode really truly was, that any one of those scenes, I think, really changes the narrative on the Jellico character in a multitude of ways. So yeah, the editors must have been having a nightmare trying to figure out what to cut.
Yeah, no, it was fun to revisit that. And like I said, when we started this podcast with Best of Both Worlds, I had no idea that this Blu-ray existed. I've never seen it anywhere. And then I was just kind of searching. I'm like, wait a minute, that looks like a Blu-ray. Is that like a bootleg copy? No. And so I went on Amazon and purchased it. And glad I did, because there's some cool stuff. And like I said, audio commentary with Ronnie Cox is really cool too, and also with Denise and Michael and stuff. So it's really, really, really cool. Guys, let's get into some Star Trek trivia. All right, Amy, why don't you go ahead and read the first bit of one there, and then and we've kind of already touched on it a little bit, but I thought it'd be worth. Then I'll go on the second one.
Okay, Captain Jellico orders Deanna Troi to wear a proper Starfleet uniform. Even after Jellico's departure, Troi continued to wear this uniform for the rest of the series. This delighted Marina Sirtis, as the uniform reminds the audience that she is, in fact, an officer with command authority. As for fans, the general consensus was widespread approval for this change, with the general agreement that Troi looked great in uniform.
Have you heard anyone actually push back on that decision? I haven't. Everyone loves it.
Yeah, everyone does love it. I've not heard. I mean, they like her other uniforms or,
Yeah.
outfits, but yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
heard any negative comment
What
from
about
it.
you, Kyle? Have you heard any native feedback?
I
on
have
her
never.
thing?
Everybody I
Yeah.
know loved it. They thought it was. Why wasn't it done sooner?
Go
Exactly.
Jellico. Go
That's
Jellico.
yeah.
Yeah.
Should have been
All
done
right.
sooner.
This one I thought was kind of funny, guys. In 2012, Michael Dorn related a story about the production of this episode to the cast of The Next Generation at the Calgary Expo. During shooting, while he, Patrick Stewart, and Gates McFadden were working in the tunnels of the set of Kelters 3, Selters 3, at Paramount Stage 16, Dorn and Stewart started laughing uncontrollably. There were many stray cats roaming around Paramount Pictures, and as the set was covered with sand, they frequently used it for cat litter. Dorn asked Stewart what he was laughing about, and he said, "I don't know how I got here. I was at a seminar in Santa Barbara. The next thing I know, I'm crawling around in cat shit."
Oh.
Kyle, you want to read the next one?
The producers wanted to establish Jellico as a more by-the-book captain to Picard through subtle differences. Whenever he enters the bridge, a member of the crew announces his arrival. He insists on crew members wearing full uniform whenever they are on duty, and where Picard says "make it so," Jellico has a catchphrase of his own, the less friendly "get it done." now, if he was a little bit more, from the south, it'd be more like "get her done."
Yeah. Amy, go ahead and get the next one.
Well, Patrick Stewart was ecstatic to be able to work with Ronnie Cox. Cox's first lead role had been in Deliverance in 1972, directed by John Borman. Stewart's first lead role had been in Borman's subsequent film, Excalibur, in 1981.
Ronnie Cox talks about that in the audio commentary of this. That's how they got a lot of this trivia, is from this audio commentary, which I thought was really cool. The last bit of trivia for part one is the first appearance of Vice Admiral Ilana Nechayev. Admiral Nechayev would go on to appear in 3 more episodes of TNG, as well as 2 episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I was always a fan of Nechayev. And it was really cool seeing her interviewed in the Blu-ray special features about this. And she talked about the uniform as well. Really, really cool. All right, let's get into part 2 trivia. Who's next?
That would be me.
All right.
David Warner took over the role of Golma Dredd on 3 days' notice. He could not learn his lines in that short time, so he had to use cue cards. He said, "Every line I said, I actually was reading it over Patrick Stewart's shoulder, or they put it down there for me to do it. After I finished it, I thought it worked, which obviously it did."
All right. Am I next? I think I'm next here.
Amy.
Amy, you go ahead.
Yeah.
Amy.
So this is David Warner's third and final appearance on Star Trek, as well as playing a Cardassian here. He played a human in Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, and a Klingon in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country.
He was Gorkon. He was the Klingon that wanted peace with the Federation. He was the one that got assassinated. And it was interesting to see him go from this kind of cool Klingon, setting the stages for future peace, and then he goes and plays Madred, and then he's this great human character in The Final Frontier. But Kyle, we remember him from another film back in '82. That was my first appearance or first knowledge of him, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't he in Tron?
Yeah, he was. He played Sark in Tron.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, he was in Tron. So yeah, okay. Next, Madred's test of using 4 lights is an homage to George Orwell's 1984, in which another O'Brien tortures Winston Smith until Smith admits that he sees 5 fingers when O'Brien only holds up 4. Now, what's interesting about this, guys, is that's this movie right here, 1985, based on the book by George Orwell.
1984.
You said
85. What did I say?
85.
85
was a good year.
yeah. 84. Okay. What's interesting about this, Kyle, is I've never seen this film, never read the book. But guess what? I'm going to be watching this film very soon because we're going to be covering it on Time Warp 1984 will be one of the films that we'll be talking about. So apparently, spoiler alert,
Yeah.
there's a torture scene in this film that was inspired to do this film of that are full lights, not full fingers. So there you go.
This next week to the trivia, Amy, I think you should read it since you just finished reading Patrick Stewart's memoir, because I think I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little insight on this.
Yes. So Patrick Stewart prepared for the scenes of torture by reviewing tapes provided by Amnesty International. He agreed to perform the first torture scene naked, but only as long as it was on a closed set.
Kyle, you get the next one.
Yeah. This episode was intended to establish the Cardassians as the main villains of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which we've talked about in this episode, and it was about ready to begin its run. Ronald D. Moore, the writer, would become the senior writer on DS9 when Star Trek The Next Generation ended. This is the last Star Trek The Next Generation episode to air before Star Trek Deep Space Nine began on January 3rd, 1993. Of course, the Cardassians play a pivotal role on DS9, and of course, Ronald D. Moore went on to remake another classic science fiction show in Battlestar Galactica as well.
And he went on to be the showrunner for the very popular Outlander show, which based on a very popular book series filmed in Scotland. My wife turned me on to that series, and we actually visited some of the filming locations while we were visiting Highlander locations in Scotland. It was great. So go Ronald D. Moore. He's done well for himself. Okay, the last bit of trivia we have here is at the 50th anniversary of Star Trek convention in Las Vegas in August 2016. Real quick, Amy, were you at that one?
I was, and I remember voting.
Okay. Fans voted this in Chain of Command Part 1, 1992, the joint 7th best episode of the Star Trek franchise. Amy, tell us about your experience with that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, so they had this thing that you got to vote because we wanted to know for the 50th. It was just a fun, interactive thing. It was really fun. It got everyone like talking about what was the best.
Nice. That's awesome. All right. All right, guys. Well, this is a Union Federation podcast, and we're discussing, of course, Chain of Command Part 1 and 2 with this limited series talking about all the 2-part episodes. But let's get into the last away mission here. One thing these 2 episodes were not short of was good guest stars and wonderful performances. We've touched on a few of them here, guys, but I want to get your thoughts on the guest stars. And feel free to, any of the regular cast members, if anything jumped out at you. Amy, let's start with you.
Oh, man. David Warner is amazing. I did not know that he was reading cue cards. I mean, that blew my mind for that trivia.
3 days. 3 days.
Wow. Crazy. Excellent. What an excellent actor he is. Admiral Nechayev, she was the Badmiral.
Was she?
Yes. We're not doing the niceties. You're going away.
Yeah, but she wasn't like, a changeling or anything like that. But there was seeds of the Badmiral. I see where you're going with.
Yeah. And, when they came off, would you like some tea? Oh, no niceties. I just thought, well, come on, calm down, girl, calm down. And here, if you're watching YouTube, you see Data in red. I really do like it. I prefer him in yellow, but I think it's just so stark, and
it kind of feels like an alternate universe episode with him in red, right?
And like his makeup stands out more. I don't know if they changed anything, because with him in yellow versus red, he seems more white.
Yeah, that's a good call.
So I thought it's all amazing.
Kyle, I want to get your thoughts. You made a great point about Riker. Jonathan Frakes really stepping up a notch. And there was a scene where he really gets in the face of Jellico. And I showed it earlier in the slideshow, which was actually part of the deleted scene. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the rest of the cast here.
Well, obviously, I've talked about David Warner. He's phenomenal. We've been talking about Ronnie Cox's Jellico all episode. I'm going to say the Admiral wasn't a bad admiral. She was just doing her job, and it was a very hard job in a hard situation. I think Brent Spiner actually was the levity of this episode because once he becomes first officer for Jellico, you know what he was? He was Smithers from The Simpsons. and the aspect of just like, yep, we can get it done. We can do this. We can do that. That's what he felt like. It wasn't like he was necessarily the bad guy. He's just giving the facts. And hey, the facts are this. But you could just see like Geordi looking at Data like, what are you doing here? What are you doing to me? But of all the cast, I mean, Picard, Patrick Stewart is obviously phenomenal as Picard in this. The Riker of this episode is just, it's so spot on of the multiple versions of Riker, because we see the Riker who respects Picard, has all that respect in Starfleet, but you will also see the Riker who isn't going to back down from what he believes in himself. And he's in a little bit of his own hot-headedness and his own ego at play here. His ego got bruised when he wasn't named the captain because Picard, and they're bringing this guy from another ship, and then this guy is just basically treating him like he's a lackey. Like, you go do my busy work.
Can I ask you something about that scene, Kyle, real quick?
Yeah.
When he's basically sent to his room by Jellico. You know how I made the comment earlier about how Jellico in the interview, Ronnie Cox saying that like he doesn't want music, he doesn't like music. He didn't really know what the kind of music that Riker was playing. He just kind of asked, right?
Yeah, he just kind of asked, and when he heard it was jazz, he's like, "Oh, well, that makes sense."
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
but I mean, just Jonathan Frakes puts in an amazing performance here that really shows a lot of different sides of Riker. And there was a point when I remember watching this first when he gets dismissed. I'm like, are we going to see Riker go out in a shuttle and he's going to be the one to find Picard and go save Picard here? Obviously, that it didn't work out that way. But I also love the aspect of that scene in Riker's quarters, because you have Jellico having to eat a little bit of his own pride because he knows he needs Riker, because everybody on the ship has told him Riker is the best pilot for the mission. And then it's almost interesting to see when they take the shuttle out and it's him and Geordi on the shuttle. There's like almost a sense of relief with Riker. Oh, I'm working with Geordi. I don't have to be around Jellico. And I think it was a nice little play up by Frakes in that moment. And then I love that little thing where Geordi's like, do I really want to know how close? No, you don't. And I mean, it's just this is just a great Riker underscored Riker episode that I don't think people pay enough attention to as far as the version of Riker we get in this two-parter.
Good point.
You know, I have a question. Did we know that Riker is this good of a pilot? I could have sworn that Picard is an excellent pilot. Geordi, like, I think they just sort of use this to tell a good story and make us. I feel like it was a plot point where it's like, I don't think I've ever heard Riker be touted as
it's funny. I'm trying to remember if there was reference to it, but they do use him again later on, especially in the Row episodes. He's like a pilot and he's pretending to be, a Maquis and stuff like that. And so I think they go back to that plot, but I don't remember if he is known for being a really good pilot. And I can't, but that's a good question. That's a good question. I want to go back to Jellico here. As you guys know, maybe you don't know, I used to work for Decipher, who made the Star Trek customizable card game, as well as Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. And it was my first collectible card game that I played in the 90s when everyone was playing Magic and everything else. And eventually I got a job working for them. It's one of my great things that I was proud of doing. And there was a Star Trek collectible card for Edward Jellico. And if you're looking at the slideshow here, you see his picture here. He's an officer. And the card usually gives a little backstory on the character. And then below, you see his character's stats. He has diplomacy, he has leadership, he has stellar cartography and physics. And then there's a little section there. There's a little thing that says, a little download symbol that says, get it done. What that means is, if you have his card in play, you can download a card that says "Get it done" and it does something cool. So I thought that was a cool little thing that Decipher did there. One of my fondest memories, Kyle, of working for that company.
It's funny, Kevin. While you were talking, I got a call from a Detective Bogomil saying he really liked Jellico's by the book approach.
Bogomil. Bogomil, of course, being the police chief the police officer. Was it police commander?
He was the chief on Beverly Hills Cop. So
yes, yeah, he was the he was a cool cop. Yeah.
Just real quick, what we're talking about, right? Are Jellico, Bogomil, and Dick Jones his three probably most well-known roles within Fandom?
Probably, yeah. His character in Deliverance was also very notable as well. But yeah, but you got to think about his villain role. He also did in Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, that's true.
He was he was cooking in that one and RoboCop as well. He's just a great character actor and very, very cool guy. But guys, let's go ahead and let's wrap things up. We got some rating to do on this episode here. All right, so this is episode 194 Union Federation. We're talking Chain of Command. This is the part of the episode here, guys, that we give our final thoughts on here. Let me know like the impact that this episode had on you and also the rest of the series and Fandom. And then I want you to give me your final rating. And we're going to rate both of these as one episode. But I did want to let you guys know that IMDb rated part 1 8.3 and part 2 jumps up to 8.9 on this. So Kyle, I'm going to start with you first.
As far as these two episodes go as one, it is some of the most well acted Star Trek probably of Next Generation ever done. It has a significant value because of its impact on Deep Space Nine as well. However, the one problem with this two-part episode is this is a two-part episode that need to have a follow-up episode on Next Generation. Whether we see the effects of Picard getting back with David Warner's character in some way or somehow, like they meet up again, and the effect that would have on Picard. I think this was such a missed opportunity by the writers of Next Generation not to have some kind of follow-up to this episode. But so with that in mind, I'm still going to rate this episode fairly high because I think it is outstandingly well done. I'm going to say this is an 8.9 for these two
8.9
episodes.
All right, cool. All right, Amy, your final thoughts.
Yeah, this episode, I'm going to rank high. It's so good. And I agree with everything you said, Kyle. Like the acting is top notch. We are the crews working together, and there's finally this conflict that's so juicy. And the Cardassians and the torture and the leadership styles and everything is so just chewable, if that makes sense. So I've got to.
I like that. Hold on. I like that. It's chewable. I like that.
Yes,
that's good. I like that.
So and it does it. All the fans know this, and this famous "There Are Four Lights," acting by Patrick Stewart, incredible, and how vulnerable he is, and to film this naked, like he got into that role, and it's you see it even in the caves where they're trailing down, like that's pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of intrigue. So I'm going to give it.
She's thinking hard, guys. She's thinking really hard. Look at that.
Yeah.
The triple is working hard, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm going a 9.4.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. Like that. Well done. Yeah. As would you say, Amy, chewable? Like that?
Yes.
That's good. Gotta tell you, I love my physical media, and I'm glad that I found this thing. And If you are a fan of physical media and you want to see these special features, highly recommended. Maybe it's available somewhere on YouTube or Paramount Plus. I don't know. I hope it is, because you can find these, but they're getting a little bit harder to find nowadays. After rewatching this recently for this series of podcast and going back, I remember it's been a while since I've watched this two-parter. But man, I went through it with a different lens, and finding the interview, of course, with Ronnie Cox was very, very entertaining, and listening to him, of course, on the audio commentary on the Blu-ray. It not only it made me more fond of Ronnie Cox, but it made me a little more fond of Jellico. I'll be honest with you. I like the way he kind of comes in and pushes buttons. I'll be honest with you. That's not my type of leadership, but it was fun to watch, to be honest with you. I loved watching our beloved crew, and what's interesting is, I think it was Ronnie that said that they did not want to have a lot of internal conflict between the cast members, the characters themselves. So the next best thing is bring in someone to push their buttons and, question their leadership and everything. I thought that was great. And when it comes to like really, really good Star Trek Next Generation guest stars, you got to put Ronnie Cox, Jellico up near the top, guys. I mean, he just comes in and he kills it. And being a fan of Ronnie Cox and looking back, there's like a short list of some of my favorite moments of him, and he's been in a lot of stuff, guys. But now that I've talked myself up here, Amy, you said 9.4, Kyle, you said 8.9. I was hovering around 9.0, but I'm going to bump it up to a 9.2.
Okay.
That's where I'm going to stick for Chain of Command Part 1 and 2. All right, guys, let's go ahead and wrap this up here. Okay. All right. This is the Union Federation, and of course, we are talking about every two-part episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, and got a little tease coming up here, guys. The next episode 195, we're talking Birthright, Part 1 and 2, and we've been talking about, of course, Deep Space Nine making its mark now, and there's a Deep Space Nine little crossover in this as well. So we're going to dive into Worf on this. Is a Worf eccentric episode with Data getting in there as well. This is the Fandom Podcast Network, and also BQN. Amy, let us know what's going on in the BQN and tell us how we can get a hold of you.
Well, hey, you can find me in our Facebook group, and of course over on BQN, where I'm hosting All Good Things. But starting Sunday, you can see me live on YouTube, where we are going to be hosting the view screen for our season 2. So join us over there, please.
Very cool. Very cool. Kyle, where can we find you on the Fandom Podcast Network or in life in general?
Well, when I'm trying to escape from the authorities in H.G. Wells' time machine, you can find me, of course, all over the Fandom Podcast Network. We've got some great stuff going on with Culture Clash, Time Warp, Couch Potato Theater. So great episode of our hair metal podcast, Kevin, which you just put out as well. But you can find me on our Facebook group pages, posting what's happening in fandom. You can find me on Twitter at AKyleW. You can find me on Instagram and Threads at AKyleFandom. And you can also find me on Discord at AKyleW.
Very nice. Awesome. All right. My name is Kevin. I'm your captain here in the Union Federation. And you can find the Union Federation Podcast on X at Union Fed Podcast, Instagram at Union Federation Podcast. And of course, please visit, if you're listening to this podcast, please make sure you check out the YouTube a video of this on the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel. Please subscribe, share it out. We'd appreciate it there. And of course, if you are loving the audio podcast, you can also head over to fpnet.podbean.com for our master feed of all of our audio podcasts there. And also, please, join our Union Federation Facebook group where we're talking all Star Trek and, of course, the Orville. And you can find me on Spartan_Phoenix on all of the main socials there. Amy, thank you so much. As always, looking forward to seeing you next week.
Yes, thank you.
Kyle, thank you as always.
Is it my birthright to be on this podcast?
Exactly. All right. Until next time on the Union Federation podcast, live long and prosper. And we are, without a doubt, the weirdest ship in the fleet. See you guys next week.